109. The Incarnation. Chalcedon Position Paper, number 173, March 1994. The Christian community is too prone to believe the attacks on the Bible and the history of Christianity made by its enemies. They take seriously a great deal of nonsense and mythology as sound scholarship and history. We are told, for example, that many tales of virgin births and incarnations circulated prior to our Lord's birth, and that such stories were common to the Greco-Roman world. In reality, no such stories existed. The idea of incarnation was anathema to Greco-Roman thinking. The tales of miraculous births and manifestations of the gods were radically hostile to the idea of incarnation. When John wrote, "And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth," John chapter 1 verse 14, what he said was the antithesis of Greco-Roman thinking. Dr. Cornelius Van Til often stressed the importance of Paul's statement that the incarnation and crucifixion of Jesus Christ was to the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks, foolishness. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 23. The concept of God held by the Greeks made an incarnation impossible. In fact, as Patrick Madigan pointed out in Christian Revelation and the Completion of the Aristotelian Revolution, 1988, Aristotle's philosophy can be called a deconstruction of explanation because it renders its, quote, God, end quote, so self-sufficient and so beyond the universe that it cannot even be seen as its creator. To be the maker of all things would demean Aristotle's God. He could never function as an efficient cause of anything. Page 17. For Aristotle's philosophy, the world as it appears to us is impossible. Page 21. The philosophers were bound by Parmenides' central thesis. Ultimate reality must in some sense be unchangeable. Page 27. In terms of this, biblical thinking was foolishness of an embarrassing kind. Explaining creation was a problem. To understand an incarnation was impossible. Paganism was full of marvelous tales of appearances and seeming appearances, not an incarnation. To mix, unite, or confuse the divine and the created order was impossible. To quote Madigan once again, for a Hellenistic Greek, no god could touch matter and still remain God. Page 83. The Gnostics tried to remedy the lack of any adequate explanation of creation by positing a whole realm of inferior spiritual beings, demiurges and the like, to account for the world, but they too denied the reality of an incarnation. They saw it as impossible. Thus, we are told that in one of the mystery religions, which, according to Lucian of Samosata, claimed that the Greek god Asclepios had revealed himself in a snake, Glykon, the actual belief was in some kind of manifestation. The leader of this group, Alexander, had a service wherein he began the ritual with the words, "Christians begone." Marvin W. Meyer, editor, The Ancient Mysteries, a source book of sacred texts, page 87. The Christian faith was anathema to all who claimed intellectual respectability. But this meant that, rejecting Christ, these groups had no source for law. Augustine and others tell us that immorality was a form of worship among some groups. Philosophically, the Greco-Roman world rated ideas as basic and matter as the lowest kind of being. The Gnostics saw the material world as the lowest emanation from either the one or the demiurges. It was so remote from true being that it was close to non-being and actual evil. Most Gnostics saw the material world as evil. The idea of evil and non-being and matter as related still lingers in the thoughts of many churchmen as a relic of Gnosticism. St. Augustine, as a Greco-Roman product, postponed entering the church for 10 years, in part because he found the Bible too anthropomorphic in its view of God and too materialistic in its revelation and worldview. In fact, according to Madigan, creation tended for Alfarabi and Avicenna, John Scotus Erigena, and Alfred the Great, Avensborn and Maimonides, to dissolve into a necessary emanation, following the Neoplatonic pattern. Page 90. Both creation and law were thus outside the concern of the God of the philosophers. For God to concern himself with creating humanity and then regulating their affairs by law was an absurd and rather childish concept. The philosophers had to take the universe for granted. They could not account for it. Their God was too remote and too perfect to be involved with mankind. As a result, Christianity was a startling religion. It declared God's love for his creation and his plan to redeem mankind. It set forth an actual law word, a revelation from God, and, even more, the incarnation of the second person of the triune God in human flesh. It was a shocking word. It was seen by the intellectuals as foolishness. Because Western philosophy has insisted on retaining a Greek foundation, it perpetuates that same sense of offence. Only in the philosophies of men like Cornelius van Til and Herman Duyvert is there a substantial challenge to this philosophic tradition. As against that tradition, the reality of the Incarnation is the great bulwark and manifesto. Our God is one who is totally mindful of all his creation. He has declared his plan of redemption, and he, in the incarnation of the Son, invaded history to conquer and redeem it. To the Greek, that is, the intellectuals in their tradition, this is still foolishness. But unto them which are called both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 24. Who is wisdom and power for you? Aristotle or Jesus Christ? J. N. Hilgarth, Christianity and Paganism, 350 to 750, pointed out what happened. The Greco-Roman world saw the poor and the slaves as little more than animals. They were termed talking stock and semi-vocal stock. Christianity not only changed this, but developed the cult of the poor, of mercy and care for them. The maimed, the lame, and the blind were cared for. Gregory the Great stressed that God hath chosen them of the world despised. Page 4. It later became a ritual for kings to wash poor men's feet. The world began to change because, just as the Word was made flesh, so too men's faith had to become incarnate in material action. Incarnationist theology requires our immersion in the problems of our time and the application of the gospel to our age. It requires that, as the Word became flesh, so too our faith makes a material change in us and in our world. If we have beheld his glory, the glory of the Incarnation, we will manifest that light and glory to our time